All right, let's have another look at some of the skills involved in attacking this ISI form of assessment. And in this task, or in this split video rather, what I want to do is guide you through how you might begin to attack developing an inquiry question, a key inquiry question, based upon some beginning survey of the sources. And by the way, that can take quite some time to get your head around. You can't hold on forever before you make some decisions about the inquiry question, but you certainly need to do a fair bit of reading, and you certainly need to do quite a bit of thinking about what kind of sources you're going to include before the inquiry question starts to develop. And this is only a starting to develop. So here's how I started. Because of my knowledge, I know there's an interesting historical issue at a place called Risdon Cove down in Tasmania. Now, Risdon Cove, the first thing I did here was I did a Google, as you can see, of Risdon Cove, and that's kind of the way a lot of you start. You know there's an area you're vaguely interested in, type it into Google and see what happens. I think there's some deep flaws in the way of working like that, but it certainly is the way many people work. In these next couple of videos where I'm mucking around with Risdon Cove, I'm basically going to be using those two sources that you can see marked on the screen. This is an extract from the top one. Like a lot of you, I've had a look at Risdon Cove on Wikipedia. I've got no other ideas of what to do, but this is a starting point. Now, at this stage, I'd like to point out that there was a voice once upon a time out there that said Wikipedia, never use it. Wikipedia is open source, which has deep problems with it. It means anyone can contribute. But what's happened over time is large numbers of people, for all sorts of reasons, are fact-checking not Risdon Cove, Wikipedia generally, referencing matters. And you'll start to see references coming in, which are very helpful for us. Have a look at these footnoting references, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 1 and the 2 up here, etc. And notice this bit here. When it gets a little bit dubious, Wikipedia has even said, well, what's your citation? What's your source? Reference that. So let's have a little bit of a look that came in if you want to know about Risdon Cove. All right, it says, a large group of Aborigines blundered into a British settlement. Interesting choice of words. The soldiers mistakenly thought they were under attack and killed some of the intruders. Hello, intruding on whose land? Who's intruding where? And they blundered and mistakenly. Sounds a bit suspect already. And because I know about this, this is why I chose this website and chose this incident and chose Wikipedia. Now, it talks a little bit when I read down here about what happens and talks about a Lieutenant Moore. Lieutenant Moore, or Lieutenant Moore of the Royal Marines in 1803, ends up killing a number, and the number's open to argument, a number of Indigenous people, Aboriginals, who came into the Risdon Cove area. And here's an interesting quote. It says, Moore's account lists 3 killed, some wounded. It's therefore known that in the conflict some Aboriginals were killed, and that colonists had reason to suppose more were wounded, as one was seen taken away bleeding. And that's reference. So I would be tempted in the early stage of my research to follow that thread to see where it leaves me. Hopefully I'll end up in somewhere like Trove, primary sources. These might be what I select to use in my ISI. All right, then talks about, there was a 2 to 3 year old boy left behind in what was a view as a retreat from a hostile attempt made upon the borders of the settlement. Okay, I'd like to check that a bit. It goes on then further. There's a different voice in 1830 that says there are a great many natives slaughtered and wounded. Notice a different perspective, a different choice. This is now no longer blundering in some sort of mistaken shooting. These people are now slaughtered and wounded according to a different person, who actually goes on to say, look, there was no threat. I wasn't afraid of them. They didn't attack the soldiers. They weren't going to molest, injure, harm the soldiers or attack them. They had no spears, only waddies, clubs. Okay? And then someone else has added in here, well, they had no spears with them. That's questionable and that needs to be assessed. Citation is needed there. So there's already an argument emerging even in Wikipedia. This is really good for us at this stage to think about, well, what questions are already emerging? Now, I don't know if I would be developing my key inquiry question based upon Wikipedia, but I would bear in mind that the ISMG requires me to have one. So how do I nuance and discerningly use a key inquiry question? How do I explore, apply that key inquiry question to primary and secondary sources in a detailed, discerning sort of way? There have to be multiple inquiry questions, or well, one key inquiry question and multiple questions underpinning it, sub-questions. We have to draw upon primary and secondary sources that explore the perspective. So I'm in a good space with this task. That's how we get to our 5 to 6 point. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to that I've circulated with you is this matrix that's been developed by the University of Queensland to try and help students to develop their critical thinking skills and their questioning skills. Let's have a play with it now. So, we could have a fairly low-level question, and I think low-level questions or low-impact questions are good starter questions for a task like this. I think it's important for you to know what happened at Risdon Cove. So I guess what did happen, what was happening, what happened is probably playing in that sort of quadrant. If I start asking a why question, why is Moore's account of events different to the account given by Edward White in 1830, I've immediately moved up into a more complex area, a more advanced question. So this is how we start getting at the discerning level of question. What else might we try and do? As soon as I go, what the primary and secondary sources reveal about the events, I think again we've dropped back into a good starter level. Okay, these aren't really closed questions, they're not yes-no questions, but they're still not going to take me to really insightful responses. Think about this one. How might accounts of the event which took place at Risdon Cove differ? Why might the accounts differ? Playing with those kind of words certainly pushes us into starting to ask some questions about motivations and perspectives. That's taking us into a more advanced area. How might the events at Risdon Cove be representative of a wider frontier conflict in Tasmania that took place during the 19th century? We're very much into a more advanced level of question. So if I'm hitting the right starter words and I start thinking about the tools that I've got to help me unlock analysis and evaluation, I can do some interesting work. How is the debate over the events at Risdon Cove in 1803 representative of a wider history wars debate between people like Keith Windshuttle and Henry Reynolds over the scope and nature of the frontier wars? That's taking us in a whole nother space. But I don't know if I've fully discerned my key inquiry question yet. Unless I start drilling down into further sources and exploring those and analysing those, I don't necessarily have the key question for my task yet. So I'm not really at the stage where I can write any answers. There's much more background reading to be done.